De Notas a Palabras was born out of curiosity and a love for learning from others, from listening to different perspectives and connecting with wonderful people living in different corners of this beautiful planet. People who, through their own experiences, help celebrate what we all love so deeply, music and its history. Part of our mission is to help rediscover chapters of history that, for a time, fell into silence, bringing them back to life and reminding ourselves that it was human beings, as mortal as we are, who created a kind of magic capable of transcending generations and leaving an indelible mark on humanity. And perhaps one of the most beautiful things we have discovered along this journey is that there is no single way to live within the universe of music and life as a whole, nor is it a path that should be walked alone. Music is encounter, community, and memory. That is why I am especially delighted to share with you a very special conversation with Dr. Samantha Ege. Dr. Ege is an extraordinary pianist and scholar, but above all, she is someone who inspires with every word she speaks. Listening to her is to encounter someone who approaches music with love, generosity, and a profound commitment to restoring the voices of those who, for many reasons, were pushed to the margins of history. Through her work and through the legacy of remarkable figures such as Florence Price, we come to understand that great transformations rarely happen in isolation. Florence Price found strength in a community of artists and friends who believed in her and walked alongside her. And thanks to people like Dr. Samantha Ege, voices that once seemed lost are able to resonate once again with extraordinary power. Because history may forget, but memory never disappears. It always finds new hands, new hearts, and new voices through which to sing again. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. It has been a true privilege to share this moment with a woman whose sensitivity, humanity, and love for music remind us that art is not only something we create, but something we nurture, share, and pass on. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Samantha Ege.
It's a great pleasure to have you here with us, Dr. Samantha. I honestly can't tell you how honored I am to be speaking with you right now. I think what your work is absolutely incredible, and I can't wait to hear your responses to my questions.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's always amazing to be able to share, I guess, what goes on behind the scenes, right? So, yeah, exciting.
Always fun. Your work often brings forgotten composers back into public consciousness. What first drew you to research the lives and music of underrepresented music composers, particularly African American women?
Well, I have been playing the piano since I was 3 years old. And I think even within that journey, I always sort of gravitated towards the pieces that were a little bit different, or the composers that were a little bit different, or the sound worlds that were, not sort of your typical classical music sound. So I think that interest has always been there. But it wasn't until studying at university that I learned of this thing called musicology, basically a historian with a focus on music. And it just really captivated me, this discipline of understanding the world and of contextualizing historical events through musical activity. So it wasn't just what does the music sound like, but it's what's going on in the composers' lives. How are they affected by the politics around them? And that's quite a humanizing thing to kind of to bring composers to that very human level. And then in the second year of my studies, I learned of Florence Price. I went to McGill in Canada to study for a year, and the professor had this early 20th century music course. And I think what's really special that I appreciate more and more as I get older is how it wasn't, okay, now we're going to focus on women. Now we're going to focus on composers of African descent. It was just naturally a part of the syllabus. And so it was in that moment that I realized, you can be a music historian of Black women composers. And exactly. But it says a lot that was not apparent to me until I was 19 years old. So that always that moment was so transformative, and it always stuck with me. And I think that since then I had subconsciously and then consciously been working out, okay, how do I make a life around that?
Of course. I think that's absolutely amazing. I 100% believe in studying the history of a composer, because the context matters greatly, because if we didn't care about the context, we probably wouldn't even have like the romantic period, the classical period, the contemporary period. We wouldn't have those time periods, because it's like, it's just music, whatever. But like, no, it matters a lot. And your work is extremely important to understanding how to even interpret pieces.
Thank you. Yeah, I didn't know what musicology was until I was doing it. And I just thought, this is a really cool thing to do. And it's funny because when I was, just focusing on, as you say, those key periods, it almost didn't matter to me what the music was or who the composer was, because it was the process that I enjoyed, the process of telling the narrative, of drawing together the sources. And so I guess it was just about finding a topic that was interesting enough to me, because I loved that process of being a musicologist. And it's a very meticulous, and it's a very slow process, which I think is quite different to being a performer, where everything is really visible and sort of in your face, through being on the stage. Whereas as a musicologist, there are seeds that you plant that you won't see that come to fruition until much later down the line. And so I do feel like, as a musicologist and as a performer, I've got that sort of balance of the long drawn out process and then the more immediate. And I appreciate having the two of them.
That's really cool. This is not a question in the questions list, but I just wonder, is it like an abstract process trying to understand the context for like specific time periods? Because I just wonder, because music is so I know it can be very personal to each person, but I wonder, is it like also a process of trying to understand that abstract sort of process that some composers have had? Is it also abstract?
Yeah, I guess it's a mix. I mean, we could take Florence Price as an example. And if we think, for example, of the first piece that I ever heard by Price was Fantasy Negre in E minor. I had no context for that piece whatsoever. And so as I'm hearing it for the first time, I think what I'm connecting to in that moment is probably quite abstract, because I don't know who she is. I don't know what this piece is. But there's something that's speaking to me. And then I guess, that's the sort of emotional side of this work. And then the layers that come in as a musicologist is that you begin to say, okay, this piece is written in 1929. What else is going on? Okay, we have the Great Depression. It's the sort of end of the Roaring Twenties. She's, living in Chicago, and going through divorce. And then you start to add all of these layers, and then you hear what's going on in the music, and she's drawing on spirituals, and all of that then begins to inform, and then you get a fuller picture. But I think that what makes the process special is that, the abstract connection of, I don't even know who this person is, but I feel that my life is deeply entwined with theirs, and then from that, something quite magical happens, I would say.
That's really cool. Okay. So speaking of Florence Price, when researching figures like Florence Price, what has surprised you the most? Not only about the music itself, but about the stories history chose to silence.
Well, I think there are possibly sort of two levels to that. I think what can surprise me is what I learn of the individual, who she was as a person. She could be quite strict, but also she sometimes could procrastinate, which is really, really humanizing. So you learn all of these little things, about their individuality. And then I guess the other things that you learn on a more structural level is, okay, so this was a name that was, in the mainstream of American concert music. And so to forget a name like that is not completely accidental. And you know, so you also begin to think about these sort of structural dynamics at play of, you know, she's not passively forgotten. When she had her symphony premiered with the Chicago Symphony in 1933, George Gershwin was there watching. Right. So it's, you know, we have these really prominent figures in American music whose timelines are overlapping, but there's something structurally in play where composers from underrepresented backgrounds get taken out of that timeline, you know?
Yeah.
And so when we think about African American representation in the concert hall, we would think more about George Gershwin than we would William Grant Still or Florence Price. William Grant Still. So
I've never heard of this one.
Okay, he was a childhood friend of Florence Price in Little Rock, Arkansas.
Really?
And he wrote an Afro-American symphony in 1930, so just a few years before Price. So again, she's not an anomaly. There are many African-American composers writing at this time, not just George Gershwin, and they're writing to bring Black folk music into their symphonic voice. And so the fact that you know Gershwin, but you don't know William Grant Still is not an accident.
That's not an accident. That's no accident at all.
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. I actually did not know that. So in your book, Southside Impresarios, I hope I'm saying that right, excuse me. Okay, you highlight the role of Black women in shaping Chicago's classical music scene. Why do you think these cultural networks were overlooked for so long?
Well, these cultural networks don't look like the stereotype, you know, the stereotypical sort of cultural network for classical music is not a group of Black women. So I think as well that these networks, they sort of undo how we have this sort of broader cultural appreciation for the composer. Mm-hmm. So the composer is this figure that is detached, or that is above, that transcends, you know, us lower mortals, you could say. And so when you have a community that prioritizes, you know, there was this ethos, lift as we climb. So it's the fact that if I rise, you rise. That is completely against, you know, patriarchal thinking around composers. It's if I rise, you're going to get out the way, right? I'm going to rise above you. That's the competitive nature of, you know, of classical music, of canon building, right? Of lineages in classical music. And I think, and just even to pick up on that word lineage, right? That sort of straight line. Well, the way these women were working was sort of more of a, you know, a blossoming, right? Going out in multiple directions. And like so
sorry.
Yes. Yeah, no, go ahead.
It's like the visual that came into my head when you said that was more than just like the flower itself blooming, the leaves also like coming out as well, and maybe even like some twigs here and there. That's what I visualized when you said that, and I think that contextualizes a lot of like what I have learned myself through like everything I have learned over these past few years about like how it seems like the history that we know right now about classical music is not only just misleading, but can also be pretty demotivating for a lot of people, because if it's just like this straight line where if you're not good enough, you're not going to get up to the top. When no, like these composers were like either butting heads as per usual, but they were also like helping each other and going to each other's performances. Like they were people, but that's not the story we're being told today. That is so interesting.
Right. And if you are, obviously a young classical musician trying to make your way, which story are you going to be, as you say, more empowered by, right? And this story of Florence Price and her sisterhood is such a blueprint for me, because it shows me that there is another way of doing things. And and regardless of whether that, whether or not the mainstream spotlight is there, I think what's really powerful about Price's story is that she was always going to do this anyway.
Yeah, and I also I'm a firm believer that like mainstream isn't bad, but it shouldn't be the end all be all either. Just because something isn't mainstream, that doesn't mean it's bad. Just like how if something is mainstream doesn't mean that's like bad either.
Well, good.
It's all great. It's all great as long as you enjoy it.
Yeah.
And everyone's fun and everything is cool and awesome. That's great. So you mentioned in the beginning that you also play the piano. So, as both a scholar and a performer, how does your relationship with a composer change after deeply researching their life and historical context? You mentioned a little bit about this when we were talking about Florence Price, not too long ago.
Yeah, I can talk about this in relation to a different composer. So, Avril Coleridge-Taylor is a British woman she was born a little bit after Florence Price in the early 20th century, and died in I believe the 1990s. It's a relative recent, she's still in living memory for a lot of people. So I don't know, do you know Samuel Coleridge-Taylor?
I want to say that this name rings a bell, but I've never been really good with names. So
That's
I'm not entirely sure. Could you tell me about it?
So Samuel Coleridge-Taylor was a British composer of both English and Sierra Leonean descent who was born in 1875. And he, at the turn of the century, he was one of the most famous composers on the planet. And he passed away at the age of 37. He had a daughter called Avril. So Avril, she had technically a quarter Sierra Leonean heritage, but she was very, I think she kind of looked a little bit more like more European than she did African. Although I'm sure if people knew her heritage, I'm sure that they could, see that she was also a woman of African descent. Anyway, there was a point in her life when she went to South Africa to create a new career for herself, because there was a really lively classical music scene in the 1950s, but also, there's apartheid. And so she goes over there as a woman of African descent to try and make a career for herself. And I think in the process of that, she's quite naive about South African politics. So she ends up kind of playing it down and being like, well, everyone treats me well, and so it's all fine. But actually, those apartheid laws are getting tighter and tighter. And eventually she gets basically kicked out of the country.
Oh my God.
When I had the opportunity to get to know her music, I was a bit hesitant, because I thought, well, how could this woman who shares African heritage like I do have thought it was feasible for her to go to South Africa during that time? And even during that time, the Black communities that supported her father kind of looked at her like, what are you doing? This makes no sense. And so she was a bit ostracized in that way. So I had hesitations about learning her music, but then, exactly. As I got to know her story, I began to sort of identify with parts of it in terms of, she was incredibly naive. And I think that she thought that because she was British, she might be able to navigate the apartheid system. She thought that her nationality would come before her color. And so her story kind of brought up a lot of, I guess, feelings for me that I also have as a Black British woman. There was a lot about her story that's relatable. This idea of your Britishness being challenged, people experiencing being British to a certain extent, and then all of a sudden that sense of identity is completely troubled or contested. And so I guess it was that empathy and that seeking to understand why she made those decisions, and the fact that she was so deeply ashamed that she really tried to align herself to Pan-African politics and almost make up for all that naivety. And so when I was learning her piano concerto and realizing that not only did she conduct that in South Africa, but the third movement is dedicated to her father. And so it's the fact that she had this all apartheid orchestra playing the music that honored her father of both African and English descent. And so again, that began to change how I felt about her, because I thought actually she never tried to hide who she was in South Africa. She was just incredibly naive. And I think we all have those moments of being naive. And I think it's how she tried to recover from that, I think matters a lot. And also just the way that the movement that's dedicated to her father is so powerful as well. So that's a case where the story, the history, the performance, and my own identity all kind of come together in a project. So that's been really amazing to champion Avril Coleridge-Taylor, because she's a story that's close to home. I guess more so than Florence Price. I'm not American. It feels like I shouldn't have to say that, but a lot of people think that I'm from the States. A lot of people think that I'm American. I don't know why. I don't know why. Yeah, I have no idea. So for the record, I am not American. And so to have this story of a woman of African descent from the UK, and to almost be able to contrast and compare her experiences with Price, again, as a music historian, that's so exciting, because that's, how do these cultures interact and overlap and differ?
So this is on a different, a more sort of academic question. Many people think of research as something distant or academic, yet your work feels deeply emotional and human. How do you balance rigor with empathy when telling these stories? I feel like right now, when explaining Avril's story, thank you. When explaining Avril's story right now, it felt like you had a very deep understanding of both her context, which is obviously very important, but you also had you mentioned something that I think is very important: the empathy you felt when you were researching about her, which I think is always important when researching any composer. But how do you balance that sort of, the whole logos versus the emotional parts? Like, how do you balance the logical, the facts, the factual parts with the emotional telling of a story?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the research side is, I'm always going to research the things that I find interesting anyway. And so, when people talk about research being objective, I just don't see how it can be for our subject of music. Surely we have to like Beethoven to write about him as much as we do.
Honestly,
yeah, I don't know of anyone that is whether it's a Beethoven, Mozart, etc. scholar who doesn't like what they're writing about, because why else would they write their 10th or 11th book on the same thing? So there is a bias there. I guess where the objectivity comes in is with the rigor that we apply. So, I'm not romanticizing the stories of the people who write this music that I play. With Avril Coleridge-Taylor, I don't romanticize that she made some really problematic decisions. With Florence Price, I don't romanticize the fact that there weren't issues of colorism or classism,
for sure.
and various forms of snobbery within her circles. Those things are very much a part of the story. And I guess, yeah, objectivity comes in terms of maintaining that balance of, yeah, I write about these people because I just think that they are fantastic and their stories need to be told, but also it matters how I tell this story, because I want these stories to resonate in different spaces and be legible in different spaces. So if I write if I write a piece which is just how much I love Margaret Bonds, that's not going to that's not going to resonate in the academic journal space, where there are certain expectations around how we frame research, etc. So I guess it also just depends on audience and outlet. Who am I directing this to? What voice needs to come forward? Or what writing and academic conventions do I need to put on display to show that I'm also a serious academic, not just, a storyteller, which I also am. And I guess, that translates to performance as well, in that, as someone who has become a specialist in certain types of repertoire, you can hear when a performer is just playing the notes as opposed to having actually studied, as we say, the contexts. And the way that would translate is, for example, if someone was playing Bach and had not done any sort of research into Baroque keyboard technique and touch and that history, that would or should inform how you play his music. That also applies to Price. That also applies to Margaret Bonds, and that applies to so many of the composers that I research. But I think because these composers are from underrepresented backgrounds, people don't do that work because they think that they don't need to. But at the same time, I would never just play, something more established. I wouldn't play Mozart in the style of Rachmaninoff, right?
No, exactly. Exactly.
So, I think for me, I guess that balance, it comes back to a variety of things: audience and context, intention, etc.
It's a nuanced. It's very nuanced, and I think that's exactly what makes it so important to understand, because at the end of the day, any person's story is going to have those little like imperfections, because we're human. That's going. And I think even knowing those imperfections can make your own self feel more like, oh, so it wasn't just me who was thinking that, or oh, it wasn't just me who went through that, and it makes them more I had the word in Spanish but not the word in English. It makes them more familiar to you, more close. And I think when I learned that Chopin was so afraid of playing in front of an audience that he would turn off all the lights, I had never felt more related to up until that moment. I was like, wait, he understands this. So you've spoken through performance, books, recordings, and documentaries. Do you feel like the message that you bring with that research changes through different mediums alongside the different audiences?
No, I don't think the message changes at all. I think it just takes on almost like a different language because it's a different medium. So even if I'm performing versus doing an interview, I think that my intention is still the same, which is to have this story be heard, but to tell it in the best possible way for that specific context.
Do you feel like those audiences might perceive it differently through different mediums? Because we're all different people and we all learn through different mediums as well. Like some people might learn better reading off of a book than listening to a video. So do you think that also changes like some people's perspectives on like certain parts of research?
I think so. I mean, if I draw a comparison, there was a conference that I did a couple of years ago in the UK, and this was quite early when I was sharing music by Price that hadn't been, it will be published. I'm publishing it this summer, August 2026. Price's complete fantasy nerd compositions. And so I shared that at a conference, and there were a handful of people at the conference. And I just remember coming away from that thinking, this is the wrong audience, because they just, as a whole, just did not get it at all. But it was good. It was good to know that, because now I can sense what that feeling feels like and be like, okay, that is not the audience for this work. But then there are times when I play, and I get to play in front of, it could be thousands of people. And they might not be the people that would go to my book first. Those might be two completely different audiences, but through the performance, they might get to know my book and my other work. Or through something I've done on the radio, they end up coming to a performance. And so I acknowledge that there are different audiences that will access my work in different ways. But I hope that sort of cross-fertilization, of audiences or whoever's engaging with my work, I hope that that leads them to something else. But I would say that when I say about knowing who my audience isn't, I'm talking about that sort of performative academia where the point is to, not even engage with, well, did you like it? Did you like this music? Did you like the narrative? It's to just simply, I don't know, I guess flex one's own intellectual muscle in a way that's not useful to me. It's not useful to the topic. But luckily, those are very small spaces. As I said, there were just a handful of people, so it doesn't really matter. But it's data or data. I don't know which way you want to say it. Okay, but it's information for me to think about how, as an academic, we do cherish some of these academic spaces, but in those spaces, Black women are not read, they're not understood, they're not listened to, and so let me just find the spaces where my work can be understood. So I think that's how I try to navigate it. And I haven't had an experience like that one in quite a few years now. So that's pretty good going.
That's really cool. So what challenges do researchers face today when trying to reconstruct the lives of composers whose archives were fragmented, ignored, or lost?
Well, I think that's it. It's the fragmentation, the ignorance, and the loss. I think those are the challenges. So it's being creative, really. The number of places that I've been to looking for archives and various libraries that I end up emailing, just saying, I've seen that you've got this in your finding aid. Can you just send me a few scans so I can get a sense of what's there? I think the challenge lies in all of those things that you've identified, but overriding the challenge is the sense of incredible fulfillment in terms of being imaginative with how you then navigate that, because there has to be a way to tell these stories. And I feel like such a hypocrite, because there's a story that I'm working on at the moment that is really hard, and I have given up a few times, but I'm pushing through. And I'll tell you more about it at another time. But interestingly, it's one of those where the more I push through, or the more I sort of give up and then push through, that process is rewarded. And I guess it's a reminder that this is not easy work either. And there's that question of, why don't we know about these composers? Why hasn't this work been done before? Well, actually, it's not easy. And when people say as well, why hasn't this been done before? The chances are there were people that tried. I can definitely say that I have, academic predecessors who would have been doing the work that I was doing now and would not have been supported by their music departments. They would not have got contracts to publish their work. And Raylinda Brown, the Florence Price biographer, who published The Heart of a Woman, The Life and Times of Florence B. Price. Her book was published 3 years after she died,
Oh, wow.
Yes. And that book, she was ready to publish that decades before. And the publisher reached out to the processes that you have your manuscript and reviewers assess it. I believe there was one reviewer who was, you know, green light, this is wonderful. Another reviewer who said this work is too angry. There was nothing angry about it other than the fact that a Black woman had written it and that it was on the topic of a Black woman. And that reviewer then interpreted the work as too angry. And so people, you know, say, oh, I'm so frustrated by the lack of Florence Prize scholarship. Well, do you know what it's taken to get to this stage? Yeah, like... You know? So there's a real sort of lack of appreciation for the battles that Black women in particular before me have had to fight to get this work into certain spaces. And, you know, and I'm in this position where, you know, when I'm working on this story and I think, oh, this is too hard, that's just me. At least I'm not having people around me say, yeah, your work is this, your work is that, and feeding in this, you know, negative energy. And so there are these historical challenges, meaning that when I am doing this work, I acknowledge that in a different universe, there would be so much more literature,
for sure,
and so much more research. But it's institutional in the same way that, you know, a composer like Helen Hagen is not as well known as she should be, the first Black woman to graduate from the Yale School of Music. The scholarship on Hagen is limited because, you know, of that lack of institutional support that says, yes, we will put money behind telling these stories. So those are the challenges. But I also have to say that when doing the work, in the midst of the work, even amid my own sense of self-doubt, the feeling of telling these stories is just incredible. And, you know, I'm very proud of the work that I've done and what that work builds upon.
You should be. Your work is absolutely incredible. Helen Hagen.
Yes.
Hagen. This is new. I don't know if I know this.
Yeah, she wrote, so, you know, people talk about Price as the first Black woman to have a symphony performed by a major national orchestra, but in 1912, Helen Hagen was at Yale, and she wrote a piano concerto, which she performed with the Yale student orchestra. And so even though it's not a symphony, what it shows is that even decades before Price, Black women were writing in these large symphonic 100%. Forms. And if Helen Hagen is a name that precedes Price, then who precedes Helen Hagen, you know? And that's, I see how your face lights up at that. And that's what to me, it means to be a music historian, to be like, well, what else is out there? Let's go find that out. And to me, I find that, you know, that is my motivation. It's exciting.
That's always like, and I also say this as someone who also writes stories, and also like just seeing people be fascinated by the amounts of composers that are not talked about is incredible. Like every time I've told a couple of my friends about my project, about this project in general, and they have all been consistently like, wow, really? I didn't know that. And they wanted to know more and more. And I think that feeling is just, I don't think there is enough words or any words that can explain that feeling of, oh my gosh, we're actually recontextualizing history and showing that, no, it wasn't just Beethoven or Mozart or Bach, which are all great. There was more beyond that. And I think that's absolutely that's such a great feeling. So your recordings often present world premieres or works unheard for decades. What does it feel like to sit at the piano knowing you may be giving a composer their voice back after a century of silence?
It's really magical. Yeah. There's no other word for it. I think that's the primary emotion, that it is really magic, because, you know, you're hearing the sound as they heard it in their head. I mean, that's incredibly, I don't know, almost spooky.
It is a little spooky.
Yeah.
Like a ghost. It's like haunting the narrator.
It is.
Omnipresent.
Because their presence is then brought into that space because their music comes alive and you're a part of the reason why that happens. So that is really, really exciting. Sometimes it's quite nerve-wracking. So with the Avril Coleridge-Taylor piano concerto, that one felt really nerve-wracking because of not having a sense of how it was supposed to come together with orchestra. I think that at least with everything else I've recorded, I've always had a stronger sense of what it feels like to come together orchestrally. I will also add that recording was with the BBC Philharmonic. And so that was, that was a new level for me.
Wow. Okay.
So that was also a huge sort of milestone to do a recording like that with an orchestra of that caliber. And to not let myself down, not let the composer down, not let the conductor down, not let anyone down, really.
Anyone down, yeah.
But I guess part of that process, though, is realizing, hold on, the BBC Phil doesn't know what this music sounds like either, right? Exactly. And so there's that sense of us figuring it out together. But I have to say, during the recording process, I was so kind of in the zone of, let me just not mess up. And so after the recording, when I heard the music, this is before it becomes the CD that everyone, or the tracks on Spotify or Apple, whatever. You listen to it, yourself, and just kind of listen out for details and just kind of make sure that you've got the sound that you want. And so I remember listening, and I didn't realize, but I covered my eyes and I held my breath, and the music started. And then I realized, okay, wait, what am I doing? I'm being really weird right now. And I just kind of had this massive exhale of like, oh my goodness, this is incredible. And it really felt like the composer had kind of come to life in this very 3D way in front of me. And that was just such an extreme emotion, to feel like literally I can hear her, I can hear this composer, I can see her. So that was a really intense experience. But I think it's also because the preparation for me was really intense. Like I just really wanted to bring my best to that recording. Of course. So that was both magic and a lot of pressure that I put on myself.
Yeah, I feel like anyone who has done recordings of that scale, or just even performances of that scale, can feel that pressure. That is, and well, continuing on this like whole idea of like bringing back voices to composers, specifically women, and in your case, Black African American women, or just Black women in general. In your opinion, what responsibility do performers, educators, and institutions have in reshaping the musical canon today?
That's a good question. I think for me, it's a bit more complicated, because I personally don't do the work because I feel like it's my responsibility first and foremost. I do it because I love it. And so I think if an institution doesn't love it, don't do it. Don't touch this repertoire, because you're not going to do it well. You're just going to do it tokenistically. So I think if an institution does feel that they have that responsibility, then do that from a place of love and curiosity for this repertoire. We were talking just a few minutes ago about how when you were sharing with your friends all these histories that you're learning, there's an excitement that comes out of that, right? And that excitement is exactly the fuel that you need to do this work. And I say that because I want to contrast that with the summer of 2020 and the Black Lives Matter movement, and how that became the fuel for change. And that fuel was grounded in the trauma of seeing Black people executed, in real time. Obviously, art can be born from trauma, but does that sustain us? Obviously, it hasn't been sustained, because a lot of these institutions are now just going back to business as usual. What would it have meant if that response could have transformed into a love and a curiosity and an eagerness and an enthusiasm for these stories, rather than, oh, we just have a duty because, you know, we've seen something horrific and now we're going to have this knee-jerk reaction, which, as I say, we're back to the status quo. And so I think that if your responsibility is born out of a condescending approach to, oh, we kind of owe it to represent Black people in our programs, or to represent underrepresented groups, you know, I don't think we or any of these composers are looking for your pity. That's not what this is about. So that's why I sort of hesitate with that question of responsibility, because it also assumes that these institutions know more, and they know what's best for us, and they know what's best for classical music. So it's a complicated question. I would say, if you love this work, find a way to do it. Find a way to share that joy, because that's the infectious thing. That's the incredible thing. That's what we want to spread, and that's what will sustain us, and it will sustain our art.
And I actually want to add on to that. I actually think that seeing others be passionate for something is exactly what makes other people want to act as well. Because, I mean, for my own personal, for context of my own personal story, I was always like, I was never really like taught to see like the, like, how do I explain this? Like the sort of gender disparity in music. I was just told, like, you can play this. If you like it, play it. And I was actually, I started with, I started with Maria Szymanowska with one of her pieces. That was like, my first ever performance when I was like really little tiny, was a piece from Maria Szymanowska. I forgot the name of the piece, but I feel like ever since I was young, I was always taught, like, well, yes, there's Beethoven and Bach, but there's also these, which are also really cool and really awesome. And I feel like it starts from there. It starts from putting that seed of, like, I love this, and everyone else should see how much I love it. And if someone wants to pick one of the fruits and have it themselves and then plant that seed, that's how it's going to spread. Is it a slower process? Maybe. It depends. But I do think that your response actually, like, interests me a lot. It's a very unique perspective on it. I never thought of it that way either, because you have a point. I actually often feel like sometimes when institutions just shoehorn in as much music as they can, while not having that much diversity in their repertoire, it's just kind of like, okay, I guess we're playing this, but we're not being told why. We're not even being told if we like it. Or, like, of course, when it comes to technical stuff, that's a different story. But like when it comes to the emotional stuff, that's where I kind of feel there could be a wall. That's really, really cool. It's not cool. It's interesting. It's interesting.
Yeah. It is interesting. And I think your point about, you know, I like the analogy of the fruit and then someone else takes the fruit. Yes, it's a slower process, but it's more meaningful because it's taking time. And again, full circle to what I was saying at the beginning, that's what I love about being a musicologist, is that it takes time. There are projects, another composer, Undine Smith-Moore, she is a little bit after Florence Price, and she wrote a piano trio called Soweto in response to apartheid. And I learned of this piano trio in 2021. I performed it in 2022. And next year, I'm going to have an article about it published it's a very academic article, Journal of the American Musicological Society. But it's taken time. It's taken time to get to that process and to get to that stage of the process of publishing the article. But it's because it took time to research this trio that I'd never heard of before. When I asked for copies of it, this was during the pandemic, I was sent, I think it was definitely over 300 pages of music, where she'd written all of these different sketches of what the trio could be. So then I had to work through that. And then there was sharing what I thought the trio might be if I pieced it together with the ensemble, which is Karslav Askins from Boston, who flew over to the UK to do this performance and the recording. And so everything kind of, everything took time. But that's also not a process to be rushed, because I also wanted to understand, okay, how did this woman who, she's called the Dean of Black women composers, how did she come to write this trio about Soweto? What was it that made her so connected to the story? And what's really powerful is what we were saying earlier, is that in the third movement, she kind of moves from the realities of the horrific traumatic events that ran through the apartheid era to having this third movement, which is all about the beauty of memory and the fact that we can still hold on to memories that mean a lot to us despite everything that's going on. And for me, just on a personal level, that really spoke to me, because it's a way of finding agency. And, yes, you have all of these horrible things going on in our world. How do you find your humanity? How do you hold on to beauty in the midst of all of that? So yeah, it's taken me ages to work on that story. But good work takes time, right? So
course. Well, a diamond doesn't become a diamond in a day.
Exactly.
And I also think that there is such a difference between like gaining information and knowledge, because gaining information is easy. You can, or relatively easy. Let's just say like, oh, you want to know how to grow an apple? You can just, nowadays we have like the search engines. We can just, how to grow an apple. There, done. And that's how you know how to grow an apple. But knowledge is cultivating that information. It's like, okay, so there's this fruit, I'm gonna cut it. Oh, there's seeds in here, I'm gonna plant it. Oh, let's see if it likes this kind of dirt. It's that learning process that I feel like we're also losing more and more as time passes, and as everything becomes more immediate, quick. And I think it's so important to hold on to that slow yet really important process. Aging like fine wine. I love that saying,
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, honestly, I feel so grateful for the work that I do, because there is no shortcut. There's absolutely no substitute for doing the work, because, it's funny when I try to make sure that AI does not come up when I search for things. But for example, but if I'm looking for something, and then AI is trying to give me a narrative about Avril Coleridge-Taylor, and it's like, well, you don't know that, because guess who the person is that holds that knowledge? Yes, it's me, right? So, so when it's trying to tell me stuff about the work that I've done, I find it laughable. And if AI wasn't so catastrophic, it could remain as just being laughable. But it's, there's it, and that's the other thing. It sort of presents the information with such confidence as well.
I know.
And if you don't know how to sort of discern that, and you don't know how to do your own slow work, it's really, really, I think, quite disastrous. But I do feel very lucky, because there are times when I'm practicing the piano and it's not going well. But I'm also glad that there's no sort of substitute for that process, right? It has to not go well. It can't just be that every practice session is just wonderful and everything fits together and I'm ready to go. Exactly. So I'm grateful for being in this work that requires slowness.
want to add one more thing before we move on to the last question.
Yes.
I feel like also shortcuts aren't necessarily bad. They can sometimes help you immensely when trying to close a project or when trying to figure out something more about something. They're not a bad thing, but when you start taking, it's like if you're walking down a road and the only path you take are the ones filled with shortcuts. And yeah, it gets you faster to where you need to go, but what if the other route that you could have taken had flowers and birds and people that you could have seen, a village that you might have been able to pass through and maybe get a little drink or something to eat. It's nice to take shortcuts every now and then, but the moment you depend on it, you distract yourself from things that are equally as valuable, if not more.
Exactly. Yeah. I love these analogies.
So, as the last question, because we're close to finishing, and I'm very sad about that, but for young musicians and researchers who wish to explore forgotten histories, what advice would you give them about where to begin and why this work matters? Although I feel like we've already established that a lot. Let's do a huge TLDR.
Okay. Start with your curiosity. Start with what you love, because this work is not easy. And when there are moments in which things are difficult or they feel difficult, remembering that actually this is what you love and you wouldn't want to be doing anything else is what will carry you through. On the other hand, you will have people older than you looking at your work and thinking, well, I wouldn't do it that way. And they'll project that onto you by saying, well, if you want to be considered for the job market, if you want a career in this or that, you have to do it this way. And what worked for them will not work for you because you're a different generation. You are growing up in a completely different context. I had a professor who told me that the work I do will never be marketable. And by the end of this year, I'll be on my 4th book and would have recorded my 7th album. So, you have to learn to listen to yourself. Obviously, there are going to be people who are older than you that have more experience. And what I would say is that the best mentors are the ones who have a vision for you of who you're going to be and of who you are and of who that person's going to become, not the mentors that have a vision of who they think you should be. There is a difference and it feels different. I have wonderful mentors who have seen where I am now before I even got here. Those are the mentors to look out for. And just like any sort of relationship, it takes time to get to know who those people are, to get to know what their interests are. If it feels like support, that's great, So I think, listen to yourself and look out for mentors who want to mentor you, not little versions of themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You again, I love, for some reason today I'm obsessed with using apples and seed analogies today. But it's like grabbing the seed from another apple tree and expecting that seed to grow exactly the same way that previous tree grew, have the exact same branches, have the exact same rings inside of the trunk, have even the exact same flavor of apples.
Yeah.
And I think, I feel like that's something that a lot of people need to listen to right now, of all ages. I feel like, especially with the mentor part, I feel like that is extremely important. Having someone who wants you to be you is always going to be more fruitful and more...
We love fruits in this conversation.
We love fruits in this conversation. It's always... I think I might want a fruit after this. But it's always more... It enriches your life more than dressing yourself up to be someone else that person wants you to be. Like, they're like either a mini them or a, not to put disrespect on his name, but a mini Arthur Rubinstein,
we all have our own paths. And as a really great colleague said to me, you are the expert of your own life. And that's the thing to remember as well, that you have all of this context for who you are, that's going to inform certain decisions, and things might not make sense to people. You know, I remember recording my first album and I had some colleagues be like, oh, I didn't realize you were recording an album. And it's like, well, I told you that I was, but they couldn't make sense of it because it didn't fit their worldview. And so, you know, you'll come up against that, but you are the expert. You know why you're doing what you're doing. So do it and it will make sense. And those same people will come back to you and be like, oh, can you tell me how you did this? And yeah, and you can laugh and deal with that however you want to. But, you know, just it is such a cliche, but it is about staying true to yourself because you know who you are, what it is that you want to do and why you want to do it.
And sometimes if you don't know who you are, that sort of process, if you're doing something you love, can help you get to that conclusion of, oh, this is who I am, not what a bunch of these people told me that I am. I'm actually this and that and that and that.
Yes, exactly.
That's absolutely wonderful. Well, thank you so much for this interview. It was so fun. Thank you so much for being here with us. I think this was such an incredible interview. And I can't wait to hear and see and read everything you're going to publish in the future. I'd love to learn more about the composers you've researched, and I'd love to know more about your future projects, because there's always going to be something new.
Well, thank you. These conversations are so energizing. Yeah, it reminds me of the people that are connecting to this work and of the joy that this work brings. So thank you for this opportunity to share this with you. And I also look forward to seeing your own projects unfold.
Thank you. The doors are always open. Well, thank you so much.